Well, Vision Sunday 2022, a day where we as individuals and as a church reflect upon God's calling to us and how we go about being faithful to that call, or to bring God's vision to life here at Tuck in 2022. I remember one time in my last church being asked by somebody, why do you get so excited by Vision Sunday? Doesn't everybody get excited by Vision Sunday? Apparently not quite as much as I do, but I do get excited about Vision Sunday. And when they ask me, but why is it so important to do something like this every year? Well, let me tell you why I get excited. Because there's lots of evidence around that churches who have a clear picture of what they feel that God is leading them and communicate that vision regularly with the congregation are usually churches with a higher sense of purpose and participation and ownership. That's why we do this, because it's a good thing for us as a congregation. And I get excited because the more sense of the body of Christ being participatory and owning God's mission is something that I get excited about. But what also gets me excited about Vision Sunday, and it's more than just reminding people of the values and the goals, which we will do that. We'll outline those today as well. But for me, Vision Sunday is more than just a lot of words that we say. It actually shapes and influences what we do over the next 12 months. A bit like a rudder on a boat. We have all these different things happening in the life of the church, and what vision is supposed to do is, like a rudder of a boat, get us all heading in the same direction. Not necessarily doing all the same things, because all the things that we do across the life of the church has a bunch of, different focuses and different people involved. But what vision is supposed to do is to get us heading in a direction which we believe that God is leading us. Vision Sunday helps us to move forward. But as we do that, all vision happens within a context. And I shared last week the context that we are doing Vision Sunday in this year is challenging. Because after the last 2 years that we've had, we struggled to get excited about planning for the future because we don't know if it's going to be disrupted again. These lockdowns have not been helpful in moving churches forward. The end of last year, we did some honest reflection on how we've gone bringing the 2021 vision to life. I do that every year. I look back and go, how have we gone? Actually, I look back over the last 2 years, and I invited Church Council to be part of that reflecting, and, well, I'll put together a bit of a report card, and if you have one of these documents, you can have a look at it yourself. If you're at home, if you go to our website, on the very front page, right at the very top, is a link that says Vision 2022. Click on that, you'll see where you can download this document at home. But I put together this bit of a report card I generalised the 5 main goals that we set for ourselves over the last 2 years. And to be honest, it was a challenging and confronting report card to put together. For some things that we set, like we set a goal to want to appoint a second minister to Tuck's ministry staff, we can put a huge tick next to that because, well, the evidence is sitting right in front of us. Kevin is actually here. So we're able to move through that and fulfill that goal clearly. Whereas other ones we haven't been able to achieve as well. There are reasons for that. And for some of them, we never got to at all. That goal about refining and renewing and recasting our church vision, which we had both in 2020 and in 2021, we never got to. So how do you respond to a report card like that? Some of us want to remind us again of the context that we just had in the last 2 years, it has not been easy to move forward to the vision due to COVID disruptions. It didn't make sense to do church-wide mission planning when we were in lockdown or when we couldn't get together as a community, because that's how you do church-wide mission planning, is you have conversations with lots of people. And that just hasn't made sense over the last 2 years. Others might want to argue that while we not have achieved all the vision goals that we set, we've actually done pretty well in other areas, and we're being too harsh on ourselves here. And I would agree with that. Things like the quality of our online worship for the last 2 years has been extraordinary, and that we will need to celebrate what has happened in that area. Instead of me trying to say, well, how have we gone as a church, I thought it might be good. Well, Kevin's been looking at us from the outside probably for 6 months now, even going through the J&C process, and I thought I'd just ask Kevin to give his assessment of how, from a person who has been on the outside but now on the inside, what his assessment of how we've been going is. So I'm just going to hand over to Kevin for a few moments.
Thanks, Phil. Well, when I first knew that I was having a conversation, JNC conversation in June last year, I did not know much about Turramurra. In fact, I did not much about Phil either. So the first thing I did was to go to Talk website. And I was pretty impressed, very impressed that even that during a lockdown, COVID, I see that there are a lot of things happening in the life of this congregation, particularly the way the online service was delivered on Facebook and other way, websites. It was one of the most advanced, one of the most developed among any other uniting churches I knew. And my first thought was, who did this? Who did this? My second thought was, we should pay him, this person, and set up our own Zoom, Facebook live streaming service. So I believe all we community, we should be proud of what we have developed, what we have achieved and maintained during this COVID lockdown 2021. I hand over to Phil again.
Thanks. And I would want to affirm that even in these difficult times, we as a church have been able to achieve some extraordinary things. Maybe not in the goals that we have set, because things turned out differently, but we still, that God working through us and using the gifts that God has placed in us, God has been able to achieve some great stuff through this church. But I've got to say, when I look at a report card, it's disappeared from the live stream, but when I look at a report card like that, the thing that challenges me the most, that confronts me the most, is that when I stand and do a Vision Sunday talk, don't want it to be all words and no action. And unfortunately, it looks a little bit like that we made these, discernments over the last 2 years, saying this is what we believe that God is calling us to do, and it hasn't been fulfilled. And I don't want them to be just words and no action. When Church Council met last year and we were trying to discern what Vision 2020 might look like, 2022 might look like, the question that we were sort of debating as a Church Council is, well, what do we do with all these unfulfilled or unrealised goals that we've got for the last few years? Do we just toss them aside, saying, well, circumstances meant that we never got to them, and now we move on to something new? Or does the calling of God to those goals still remain? Do you understand the question? Does that calling still remain? Are we discerning God still calling us to work through these goals, despite the fact there was legitimate reasons why they weren't be fulfilled? Or does we move on to something else now? Whilst that's a very practical question, I found myself also reflecting upon this theologically as well, because there's a theological question underpinning that question. When the calling of God is delayed or disrupted for any reason, does that calling remain? Or does it get cancelled and God offers a new calling to do something else? I began to wonder, are there any biblical examples of this happening? When God gives a call to somebody, and for whatever reason that call isn't fulfilled, does God then go, well, that's okay, let's move on to something else? Or does God loop back around again and remind them that that calling still remains? Can you think of examples in your head of biblical stories where that has happened? If you can't, let me give you a few, because I think that there are some examples. The first one that I came up with was Jonah. Jonah had a calling to go and preach the good news to Nineveh. He got sidetracked over in Tarsus, and God, using a big fish, reminded him of the call. And even though Jonah didn't fulfill the call initially, if you go a few more chapters, God repeats the call again. No, I still want you to go to Nineveh. I still want you to teach them the good news. This is what I'm called you to do. You need to, that call still remains. Keep going with it. Another one I thought of was Elijah. Elijah, the prophet, had a calling and was smashing that calling, if you remember the fire from heaven story, but then ends up hiding in the desert and has this really interesting conversation with God when God says, Elijah, what are you doing here? This is not where the calling, where I've called you to be. But instead of sort of saying, well, then don't worry about it, I've got somebody else to do that, that's covered. God reminds Elijah of the call again, reminds him of where he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to be doing, and encourages him to get on with the calling. But then I also thought of Jesus and the teaching from Matthew chapter 10, when Jesus is sending out the 72 the disciples, and he says, go into the towns around and, bring healing and teach them, and etc., etc., etc. But he says, if you go into a town and they don't welcome you, if they're not interested in hearing, then, shake the dust from your feet and go on to the next one. It's almost like, well, I'm giving you a calling to go to that town, but if it doesn't work, then put a line through that calling, go to the next town. Or the other one that I thought of from Jesus was the parable of the unfruitful tree, when the tree's not producing any figs, and the gardener says, well, what should I do? And the master says, give it another year. Give it another year. Put some fertilizer in there, let's see what happens. But if it doesn't do anything the following year, then we rip it out and move on to something else. And so, theologically, I was reflecting, going, I think the calling does remain. If God gives us a calling, that doesn't just disappear. That calling remains. Unless we get to a point where it's making no difference or is not helping anybody, then there are some examples where God goes, all right, let's move on to a different calling because that's not getting us anywhere. So that's some of my theological reflections. I'm happy if you want to debate with me or, sort of go, well, this is what I'm thinking. It's just what I'm reflecting on this. But it does bring us back the full circle, back to the question about this report card, and does the unfulfilled goals that we have, did that calling still remain? God called us to do that. Does that calling still remain? When we asked Church Council in our November meeting last year, the answer came back overwhelmingly, yes. Yes. That we didn't feel that we could just put a line through all that and go, well, what's next? That we needed to try and fulfill some of these callings. And so we get to the Vision Sunday 2022, where we cast our goals and visions to what God is calling us. And I don't know if you've noticed by reading this that it has a bit of a familiar feel about it. Does anyone notice that yet? Well, it clearly does, because it's a combination of the last 2 years' vision. Well, particularly the things that we haven't quite got to in our vision for the last 2 years. We've sort of thought, no, we feel strongly that God is still calling in this area. So there is some familiarity about this. But I just want to step through this quickly. As I do this, let me remind you that Vision Sunday is not saying this is the only things that are important in the life of the church. It's just saying these are the things that we feel that God is calling us to focus on this year. There are such a breadth of what we do in the life of the church. If you don't see a particular word or a particular group or a particular ministry mentioned in here, it does not mean that we've put a line through that and say we're not doing that. It just means that the particular, where we add the extra focus this year is in these areas. Does that make sense? Just want to be encouraging. So, stepping through these quickly, the first one that first area we had on that page was to refine and renew our vision in 2022. I'm a big believer that the vision of the church is not something that belongs to me or to Kevin or to the ministry team. It's not even something that belongs to the church council, even though technically I think by the basis of union it does. It is something that it belongs to the whole church. It's something that we all own and all are part of. And I think the best way for that ownership and that being part of, the participation in the vision has happened, is to get us all together and to all talk about where do we all discern God leading us as a church. It's too much work to do every year. And so we sort of do it every 3 or 4 years. And so that's why in 2020 we sort of looped back around. It was just coming up to the 3-year mark since we last did it. And we thought, no, let's do it again in 2020. But we didn't quite make that happen. And we were saying we really need to do it in 2021. That didn't quite happen. So we're saying we really, really need to do it in 2022. So our plan is in April and May, around that time, is to have some discussions with groups, with individuals, with key stakeholders, culminating in some church-wide meetings where we refine our mission and bring all those voices and all those ideas together and to work out where we're heading in the next 3 or 4 years. The best way to renew, refine and refresh our vision. And to start this process, we're actually going to encourage everybody to participate in the National Church Life Survey. This is a survey that the wider church does every 5 years. It was supposed to be done last year, but like everything, they got delayed too. So we're doing it at the beginning of this year. It's a survey that gives insights into people's thoughts and experiences of church and spirituality. And this data can be used not only for the wider church in some of the wider churches' plannings, but we get particular data related to us as well, which will be an excellent beginning point for some of our discussions in April, May. And so we're going to encourage everyone to do that. It takes around about 20 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. You can do it online, and to do it online you just need to go to that website which is on the screen and type in that code. If you forget how to do that, go to our website. On the front page there is a link that says surveys, vision surveys. You click on that, it's got all that information including the links to click on. It will take you about 20 to 25 minutes just to go through, and it will be invaluable to us. If you're a person going, oh, I hate online surveys, can't I do it on paper? Yes, you can. We have a few of them on paper that you can grab one of these, fill it in, bring it back next week. We're going to give you only a short period of time to do this because we don't want people going, oh, I've got plenty of time to do it. So remember this date, 2/2/2/22. So you've got to the 22nd of February to do these. That's about 9 days. So if you take one of these away, you've got to bring it back next Sunday. Or you can do it online any time in the next 9 days. Really encourage you to do that. For kids, you can do that as well. So if you're about 14 and older, do this one, the main one. If you're younger than 14, we've got some little handout sheets of paper. I don't know where they are. Are they up the back somewhere? Yeah. Talk to Heather, she'll know where they are. But I have one here that shows you how kids can do it as well. And the link's there. That's not on the website yet because I only realised that this morning. But it will be on the website soon. And if you think, oh, how am I going to remember all this? You'll get an email probably tomorrow with all this information on it, telling you exactly what you need to do. If you're on our weekly email list. If you're not on our weekly email list, tell us, we'll put you on. All right, caught up with that one? As I said, this data will be invaluable, and I'm really looking forward to some amazing ideas that can come out of those church-wide planning processes. I remember what happened last time. It was within the first year of me being here, and some great things came out of that were sort of a little left field, but have been amazing in the life of the church. The playgroup being one of them came out of the last church-wide vision planning process. But there was a number of other things too. So we encourage you to think through that, and then in August, September, we will do our second of the big how do we resource our mission programs. Do you remember Imagining Hope from about 3 years ago? There's a second program that goes along with Imagining Hope called The Gifts of God, which is also as good as what Imagining Hope was, and we're going to do that in August, September. So we'll do our vision planning in April, May, and then Church Council and the leadership teams will refine all that and be able to present all that in a clear package in that program, The Gifts of God. And that's where we all begin to own it and work out how do we play our part in that. Next part of our vision is to continue to focus on growing young. If you go back to when we were even two churches, Trinity and St Margaret's, we have always had in our DNA this focus on children, youth, family, young adults. It's been part of who we are forever. and I can't ever see that changing. And last year, the Church Council committed itself to spending around about 30 to 45 minutes every Church Council meeting working through this program called Growing Young, which challenged us to cement a culture in our church that supports young people and young adults to grow young as a church. And this means not only to lower the average age in the life of the church, because that's one of the aspects of growing young. We want our average age to be growing younger, not older, but also to think about the way that we do things, the way that we think, the church structures to better support and empower young people. We know that this is a journey. It's not something that we can do overnight, but we are committed to see this through. And to help us do that, to move this goal forward and to honour the Alan Williams bequest, we are moving forward with employing a part-time youth worker this year to help us move that forward as well. We're also undertaking as a church to grow the Growing Young program here as a church-wide thing. Definitely after Easter, but we're going to offer that same program that Church Council did to anybody in the life of the church who wants to do that program as well. But to help us to grow young, we're asking you to, believe it or not, do another survey. There is a Growing Young survey, and this one takes, I did it last night, around 5 to 10 minutes. It's not very long at all. But once again, will give us invaluable data in helping us continue to reflect on what we're doing as a church in supporting children, youth, family, young adults. And we're encouraging everybody to do this as well. And if you're wondering how to do it, the link's there. You don't even need a code for this one. You just go to that link and it will take you to the survey. If you can't remember the link, go to our website on the front page. You'll see a thing called Vision Surveys. Go to that. It has all the information there, or you'll get your email tomorrow explaining it all. We're asking you to do this in the next 9 days as well. So you got to the 22222 to do it. But yeah, we're really excited about this program and the way that it can continue to build upon, as I said, what has been in our DNA the entire time. And this is just the first step within that. The last thing in our vision that we're looking at this year is to embrace what it means to be a lighthouse church. We first raised this in 2020, came back to it in 2021. It is still a really strong calling. This idea that we are called not just to work within the bounds of our community here, church community, nor in the bounds of this building, but we are called to reach beyond us. And that not is only to the suburb of Turramurra, but as Professor Knows-It-All quite rightly pointed out today, that we are from many different suburbs. And so what does that mean for us to be not only a lighthouse church, but a regional lighthouse church? What does that mean? And how do we continue to embrace that? I actually believe that God has brought Kevin here to help us in this, as Kevin's had some really good experience in what this means. And I'm just going to ask Kevin to share a little bit on this point. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Phil. I hope you have still pondered my question of why does neighborhood matter? And we must understand the church exists in the local context to function as one part of ecology of our neighborhood. And our God Spirit moves in the church. The Spirit also moves, creates and recreates outside church. So to identify, to discern what God has started in our street and community, one of the mission goals in this area is to establish community asset mapping. Community asset mapping, you might remember one of the points I raised, the map of Turramurra. In order to know that the needs of our community and how we best partner, how we best contribute. So by establishing that map, we can see how we partner with the key people, partner with the key places in our neighborhood. Again, this is not just what ministry team will do or just church council. We will invite different groups of our church community to this process. And I also have a few more concrete ideas, such as starting a community choir for better community engagement in a coming month and few months. So I need some leaders who will do this with me, do this together over the next few months. Hand over to Phil.
I think there's just so much potential in this goal. Even when we're talking about it as the worship planning committee, we're talking about, how do we encourage us to do some walking in whatever our neighbourhood is and to be praying for our neighbourhood, the prayer walk idea. And we're going, that is awesome. And so we're going to try and come up with some ideas to send out to people and go, why don't you go for a 20-minute walk around your neighbourhood and pray for these three things when you see people's homes or see people as you walk past them. And so already it's stirring ideas of, what does this mean for us to be reaching out beyond us? And I'm sure there'll be even more challenges. I was challenged this morning as somebody said, our neighbourhood is not just here. We need to remember the work that we've been doing in supporting overseas missionaries in the world. And that is part of what it means to be a lighthouse church as well, reaching out. I'm going, good point, really good point. And so I'm imagining that God is going to be stirring within us all these things to draw us beyond us, to be reaching out into our community. We've already shared for way too long. I just saw the time. And who's noticed that I haven't even looked at Romans chapter 12 yet? Let me just do it very briefly just to finish off. So Romans chapter 12, did anyone remember that this was the Bible reading I used for Vision Sunday last year? Anyone pick that up? Well, I did, yeah. And partly because I love Romans chapter 12, one of my favourite chapters in the Bible. But it also, I made a point last year, and it was interesting because we were, looking at these unfulfilled goals. I reread my Vision Sunday sermon for last year, and I said to myself, that's a really good point, Phil, that I made. And so I just want to finish by making that really good point again. And it is about Romans chapter 12. You see, Romans chapter 12 is a culmination of everything that Paul has done in Romans chapters 1 to 11. He basically tells people the gospel again, the good news that what Jesus has done for us, and the grace and the forgiveness and the love and the purpose that we can find in Jesus. And then he gets to Romans chapter 12, and he sort of says, well, therefore, so in response to everything that God has done through Jesus, this is what we're called to do. And Romans chapter 12 has got two parts. In verses 1 to 8, Paul basically says, here's what you have to do as individuals. Here is your calling as individuals. And there's a whole lot of stuff about we need to personally respond to what Jesus has done for us in the way that we live our lives, in our own personal relationship with God. But then the reason I love Romans chapter 12 so much is that then it sort of I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of, blends into the last part of the chapter, which goes from thinking about how we personally respond to how we respond as a community. It's actually not only us as individuals who responds, it's us as a community who responds. And the second half of the chapter is all about how we relate to each other, how we work with each other, how we serve with each other, how we love each other. It is just brilliant. And if you need to go back and read Romans chapter 12 in its entirety, I would encourage you to do that. Romans 12 is a perfect reminder that the calling of God is both individual, but it's also about being called as a community as well. I included the Message version because I love the way that Romans chapter 12 verse 1 was translated. And I just thought it was good to read out two versions anyway. But let me remind you of what Romans chapter 12 verse 1 says. It says in the Message, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you, take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. That's what the calling of God is about. Taking our ordinary lives and saying to God, here I am, use me. And then it goes on to say, embrace what God does for you. I could actually put in brackets there, or embrace what God is doing, not only within you, but around you, in the church, in the community, beyond us. Embrace what God is doing, for that is the best thing that you can do. That is our calling, to offer ourselves to God and to embrace what God is doing. May this be our commitment and our experience this year. Amen.